Welcome to the 9th episode of Diamond Reads. Yeah. Welcome to the 9th episode of Diamond Reads. I decided to put the series on a hiatus because the 10/31/20 episode was a complete and utter fucking bust, and I was really disappointed. So the thing is, after that, I just decided to take a hiatus, and well, after my month-long hiatus, I decided to come back. So what better way to come back than by doing Shadow Reader's request? So I have Shadow's request here, and I promised him I would do it, so I'm gonna do it. So now I officially decided to come back to this series. Okay, let's try this again. The story I'm reading is called Paw Patrol: The Final Mission. Yeah, and this was written by the Shadow Reader. So without further ado, let's take a look at this. My name is Officer Michael, and I've worked with the ABPD for about 10 or so years now. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it helps pay the bills and put food on my table, so I can't really complain. With that being said, my job usually was never easy for me. There were days that I had to work an 18-hour shift because of all the calls that the station were getting for simple mishaps. This would include small things like cats in trees, small fires, and the occasional missing person every now and then. Like I said before, my job wasn't very exciting. However, there was one small group of puppies that honestly turned my time at work from exhausting to amazing. These group of puppies were called the Paw Patrol. To say that these pups were a blessing would be an understatement. These pups, at least to me, were a godsend from the heavens above. These pups Chase the police dog, Marshall the fire dog, Zuma the aquatic pup, Rocky the recycling pup, Sky the air pup, and Rebel the construction pup were a big help in keeping Adventure Bay at peace. Plus, their 10-year-old leader, Ryder, was a very mature and smart kid that not only formed the group into what they are, but made the pup's base and tower. Hell, I even got the opportunity to meet the Paw Patrol in person, and let me say, they are a really great group of pups. They are well-mannered, very polite, respectful of their authorities, and they sure love to play around. I can't tell you how many times they wanted me to stay and play fetch with me. Now, you might think that with the Paw Patrol going around and filling in our duties, there might be some resentment by the other cops, firefighters, etc., for them taking away some of the opportunities to make more money, but that wasn't the case at all. For years we had broken our backs to do some small odd jobs, but now we had the opportunity to actually focus more on real cases. So yeah, the Paw Patrol were truly amazing. However, that all ended about a year back, and let me just say that it was something terrible. I was in the office when all this happened. I was busy getting so much needed paperwork when all of a sudden, the chief busted out of his office in a panic. He told all of us to stop what we were doing and get ourselves to the Adventure Bay Forest area ASAP. When I asked him what was the problem, he told me that he would explain everything when we got there. So I got up, got my police jacket on, made my way to my squad car, and drove down to the Adventure Bay Forest area. It took about 30 minutes to get there, but once we all arrived, we got out of our cars and made our way toward the entrance of the forest. Once we all got there, I noticed that Ryder, Chase, Sky, and Rebel looked very scared and worried. I walked up to them and asked them what the problem was. "It's our pups, Marshall, Zuma, and Rocky," Ryder said with a worried look on his face. "What about them? What's the problem?" I asked. Rocky, Zuma, and Marshall went out to go for a swim, as well as help Rocky with his aquaphobia. And about 4 hours back, Chase began. "But they haven't come back yet. We tried to contact them, but they didn't answer. We tried looking for them ourselves, but for some reason we can't seem to track their collars at all. We tried searching some more, but the forest was too dense to keep looking. Don't worry, Paw Patrol. We'll find them and bring them back safely. They probably forgot to take off their collars while they went swimming, and they most likely short-curated them. They're most likely still at this pond swimming around," I said to him in a reassuring manner. Ryder thanked me for the service I was doing, and I happily accepted it. After that, I made my way back to the group of armed police officers at the forest entryway. The Commander-in-Chief, Officer Marcus, started grouping us in pairs of 2 for a search party. Once he was done with that, he started assigning parts of the forest to each group of officers. Me and my partner Kate were assigned the main pathway of the forest. We both immediately entered the pathway and immediately started our search for the missing pups. 5 minutes turned to 10 minutes, then to 30, then an hour, then 2 hours. We keep searching as hard as we could, not leaving, quite literally, any stone unturned. After about 3 hours of searching, the sky began to darken. My partner and I immediately pulled out our flashlights and kept going. After about a minute of walking, I felt something become wrapped around my ankle. I lifted my foot and shined my light at what had caught my foot. What I saw made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up straight. On my foot was one of the pup's collars. It looked as if it was yanked off of something, or in this case someone's body, as the plastic clasp that held the collar together was practically snapped off at one of the edges. The main badge that identified the specific pup and what they did was smashed to bits and the front image scratched in numerous places that made it almost impossible to identify whose it was if the collar hadn't been there. There was also trace amounts of blood that stained a good portion of the collar. Honestly, I would have easily not known that it was Marshall's collar, that some of the light red fabric had not been visible from all that blood. I looked at the collar and then to my partner, who had a look of worry plastered on her face. I immediately grabbed my police radio and dialed in to the chief of police. Chief Marcus, this is Officer Marco. Hey, did you find anything? Did you find the pups? Negative, of the pups, Chief. However, I did find Marshall's collar. However, it's covered in blood. Alright, I'll call in the bus. Keep searching, officer. Yes, sir. 10-4. I had put my radio away and kept looking around the dense forest. Now the sun had practically gone down at this point and the whole forest was covered in darkness, with only our flashlights illuminating the place. Me and my partner immediately started searching once again, and after a few more minutes of searching, we found Zuma's and Rocky's collars as well, but in worse shape than the other collar I had found. The collars had not only been smashed to pieces, but had also been torn to shreds, like a claw had torn through the fabric. I felt anxiety fill me up as I pressed on, searching, hoping and praying to God that the pups were safe. It didn't take long for me to get a small whiff of an irony smell. My partner and I continued to follow the path, with the smell getting stronger and stronger with each step. Then, without any warning, I wound up slipping into a small puddle of some sort. My partner had rushed up to me to see if I was alright, and I was, but once I shined my light at myself to inspect myself for any injuries, I saw a large amount of blood splattered all over my bulletproof vest and a large puddle underneath me. I quickly got up and inspected myself for any wounds, but there were none. I shined my flashlight at the puddle of blood that I slipped in and noticed a small trail of the crimson liquid lead towards a small clearing nearby. I felt hesitant to go as I expected the worst to be there, but I knew what I had to. Slowly walking towards the clearing, guns cocked and loaded, we step into the clearing. I called out, "Marshall, Zuma, Rocky, are you okay? If you're here, give us a bark." It was then and there that I heard a small weak moan coming about 10 feet away from me. I shined my light towards where the sound was, and my heart sunk to the bottom of my chest. Holy shit! Those were the only words that I honestly could make out at what was presented to me. Less than 10 feet away from me were the bodies of Zuma, Rocky, and Marshall, or at least what was left of them. Zuma's head was hanging from one of the tree branches. His head had been ripped off straight from his body, his spinal cord holding the dangling pup's head firmly on the branch. Zuma's face was mangled and disfigured. One of his eyes had been stabbed by a sharp rock, blood and eye juice still pouring from the mutilated eye socket. His lower jaw had been yanked and stretched to the point where it was completely dislodged from his skull, only being connected by a small slab of skin that hadn't been torn in the stretching process. His body laid in a bloody heap below his severed head, untouched and still intact. Rocky had been beaten numerous times with what I assume was a very large rock, his head being the main target of the brutal assault. Rocky's skull had completely split in half from the blunt trauma, with chunks of brain seeping out from his cracked skull. The rest of the body was covered in teeth marks with chunks of skin and muscle tissue removed, revealing the bones. Marshall had been completely ripped in half with intestines, kidneys, and liver exposed. I immediately vomited after seeing this madness. My partner immediately called for backup on her radio as I ran over towards the pups to check for any signs of life. Obviously, Zuma and Rocky were both long dead at this point. However, Marshall was a different story altogether. I made my way toward him and went to check his pulse. To my shock and surprise, he still had one. He was also panting very heavily. I remember hearing him moan and whimper in pain as he locked eyes with me. I almost started bawling right then and there when I saw that he was still conscious. He then whispered to me, "Find my legs." I didn't want to leave his side, so I called out to my partner to go and search for his legs, which she found dumped next to a bush. It didn't take long for an ambulance to get to where we are. Zuma and Rocky were pronounced dead on arrival, while Marshall was rushed to the ER for emergency treatment. However, he passed away during surgery about 2 hours later. I normally don't cry during 911 emergencies, but on that day, I bawled my eyes out like a fucking baby. There was obviously a funeral for the fallen pups, and we, as well as everyone else in the town, were going to give them the best of the best. Each pup that had passed away was buried in a coffin that was shaped and painted into the cars that they drove, or for each mission with flowers and candles surrounding them. Next to each coffin was a large wreath with each pup's image in the center of it. The mayor herself was the one who presided over the funeral of each pup. Needless to say, the funeral was brutal to say the least. There wasn't a single person there that wasn't crying their eyes out. Even I was bawling my eyes out. Ryder, Sky, and Rubble were devastated to say the least. Rubble was bawling his eyes out. Sky was a wreck. Ryder didn't even look up at the coffins. And Chase, oh my gosh, Chase. He was completely inconsolable. He was the only one not seated in a chair. He was lying down next to Marshall's casket with a small plush bear in his paws. He was weeping hysterically, not bothering to leave the side of his murdered friend. Anyone that would even try to move him, he would just sob some more and embrace the coffins like it was his life support. The funeral lasted for about 2.5 hours to say the least. Everyone, including Ryder himself, gave a very touching eulogy. Everyone, including Ryder himself, gave a very touching eulogy. They were all buried on the main Hill of Adventure-based cemetery, with large tombstones decorated with gemstones and images of each pups inscribed on each slab of stone. The funeral concluded with each of the deceased pups getting a 12-gun salute from me and the other cops. After that day, there was a week's worth of mourning for everyone, including the rest of the Paw Patrol. I would have joined in, but I had a new case that I had to work on. The day after the funeral, I was at my desk when I was startled by a large file being slammed on my desk. It was a new case that I was going to work on. I knew exactly what it was for before I'd even opened it. The rest of the day was spent trying to find suspects. However, there were very few leads. The only person we could have even considered as a suspect was Mayor Humdinger. However, that lead wound up going cold real quick after a few questions and little evidence to back anything up. So yeah, we were pretty fucked to say the least. Day after day, the case grew colder and colder. I myself took time to try and visit the remaining Paw Patrol gang and give condolences and treats to the pups whenever I could. Now, I know that it may seem a bit odd for me to go and visit them so often, but the Paw Patrol was like family to me. I honestly didn't have anyone to really call family, and they helped me fill that void in my life. However, all of that was torn apart after I had gotten that phone call. It was around 10:30 when my cell phone started ringing. I groggily got up and answered the phone. "Hello?" I said groggily. "Please help." I was immediately woken up after hearing that scream for help. I honestly didn't know who had yelled it out, but I soon got my answer after waking up. "We need help, please. He killed blood." The line died after that. I knew that the voice was Ryder. I immediately got up, grabbed my gun, my radio, my flashlight, and ran to my car. I didn't care that I was in my PJs. I knew that something was wrong, and I needed to get there ASAP. I got there in less than 10 minutes, and as I got out of my car, I immediately heard nothing but deafening silence. This was a bad sign. I carefully maneuvered my way, gun in hand, to the front door. It had completely knocked off its hinges with scratch marks covering the front. I carefully peered inside the doorway, only to see the entire base completely trashed. Everything in the base was either smashed to bits or strewn across one of the rooms. There were also deep scratch marks that covered the walls like a morbid decoration. I searched around some more and saw muddy footsteps leading from the kitchen area to the back door. I immediately followed the footsteps and it led to a large cave on the outskirts of town. I quickly dialed up the other officers. This is Officer Michael. I have a 1027, 1054, and a possible 1063. I am currently at the outskirts of town near the main cave next to the forest. I need backup. I put away my radio and made my way into the cave. I didn't want to get my flashlight in case someone would spot me. I walked deeper and deeper into the cave until late I noticed a lone torch burning brightly about 10 feet away from me. I walked over to it and grabbed it. Then I made my way deeper into the cave, my heart pounding in fear. After about 10 minutes, I soon came across a large circular room of some sort. It wasn't barricaded or anything. The walls were decorated with lit torches that lit the room up enough for me to get a glimpse of what was inside. It was completely empty, with the exception of some gear and clothing in the middle of the room. I walked up towards the discarded equipment and my stomach knotted up. On the ground was the broken and tattered equipment and uniforms of the PAW Patrol. I started freaking out at this. What the fuck was going on? I soon noticed a small door at the end of the large room. I walked up towards it and slowly opened the door. The room itself, compared to the other room that I had just been, was a lot smaller and darker. I turned on my flashlight and noticed a large rusted cage and a door next to it. I slowly approached the cage and peered inside. To my horror, it was Chase, but he was completely motionless. I quickly grabbed at the cage door and yanked at it. It opened up rather easily. I immediately checked on Chase and thankfully he wasn't dead or injured in any way. I just wanted to grab Chase and run out of that cave as fast as possible, but I knew that I had to find the others. I slowly grabbed at the doorknob and opened it, just a crack. Oh, how I wish I hadn't. In the room there was a large tar-like beast. It was around 7 feet tall with a twisted and lanky body. Its hands were long, blood-stained claws that were warped and contorted with each passing move. The face was the worst part. It had no features whatsoever with the exception of a large gaping maw with row after row of razor-sharp teeth. Next to that thing were the remains of Ryder, Sky, and Rubble. I couldn't contain myself anymore. I let out a small scream, which I immediately muted as soon as it started. However, it was already too late. The thing had noticed me by the time, and it let out a blood-curdling scream. I immediately slammed the door. At this point, I was already shitting myself in fear. I felt the door being rammed by that thing. I immediately grabbed Chase and started to run at full force. All the while, that demonic monstrosity of a being smashed the door down and was chasing after me with a speed that almost matched mine. I quickly pulled out my gun and shot the thing at least 6 times. However, it didn't seem to do anything. I dropped my gun and just kept on running. I heard the thing getting closer and closer to me with each passing minute. In a desperate attempt to try and save both my life and Chase's, I yanked my golden crucifix off my neck and threw it at the beast. The crucifix made a perfect shot into the thing's throat. The thing stopped instantly and started screaming and yelling as it clawed at its neck to try to get the crucifix out of its body, but with no use. I took this much needed time to get the hell out of that cave as soon as possible. Once I got into my car with Chase in my arms, I speed drove the road to my apartment and made my way inside. I quickly locked the door and went to check up on Chase. Thankfully, the only injuries he had was a few cuts and bruises, but nothing major. I immediately called up my boss and told him everything. He told me that they had already pulled up to where I had been a few minutes back. I warned them about what I had seen in there and told them to be careful. He said he would, and then he hung up. The next day, I quit my job, and I, along with Chase, moved out of town. He didn't seem to care. His friends were all dead anyway. I later read in the paper about the remains of Ryder and the other pups being discovered in the cave, but no beast in sight. The only thing that was found was a small burned out gold crucifix. And that's the end. Oh my god. This was one of the darkest PAW Patrol fan fiction creepypastas I've ever read in my entire life. I mean, this is really, really dark. I mean, it has a few grammar errors. I mean, I like the story. But it does have a few grammar errors, and I can't believe that even Shadow himself made grammar errors when making this. I mean, normally Shadow hates grammar errors, but he actually made a few of them while I was reading the story, so I had to correct some of them while I was reading it. Apart from that, this was one of the darkest stories I've ever read. Aside from Sweet Apple Massacre and Dipper Goes to Taco Bell, this is one of the darkest stories I've ever read. Like, oh my fucking god, I'm not even joking. Well, if I had to review this story, I'm gonna give it my final rating here. So my final rating would be 1,000 over 100, 100 over 10. Definitely would read again. That was the 9th episode of Diamond Reads, and I hope you guys enjoyed this story as much as I did, because this was a one hell of a fucking dark ass story. I'll see you guys in episode 10, and I'm glad I came back from this hiatus. I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace out. This is the Shadow Diamond signing off.